So we're continuing. You had a great lesson last week, apparently. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Apparently, I heard good things.
Well, good.
Good reviews on YouTube.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we are in the heart of the matter, which talked about, I think it's murder, talked about adultery. That was the section of the Sermon on the Mount that we're in. And so just a reminder of where we were last week. This section was on if Jesus was serious, then lust was a choice. And rather than jump right into this topic of lust, we talked about the topic of responsibility. Who is actually responsible for our actions? And how often do we actually take true responsibility for our actions? Which moved us into our humorous story of someone who, broke their Lent fast and blamed it on McDonald's, right? It seems like a ridiculous story, but how often do we actually do that? Is blame somebody else for our actions.
Does that actually say it was an unhappy meal?
Yeah. See, she was not loving it. It was an unhappy meal.
Bad
Compensation. There was a bunch of them in there.
Yeah. Did she win? Do we know?
I actually I haven't seen the follow-up.
Oh, okay.
Who is taking responsibility for our own actions, our own choices? And that's too often it's usually not us. And this is where we finished off last week, right? We read from James 1, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. But each one of us is tempted by his own evil desires. He is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. It's how exactly are we dealing with the situations when these temptations come up?
Yeah, and some of this discussion about responsibility is going to come into the next couple of chapters that we're going to get to today, when we take responsibility for our own actions.
Yeah. Things like this. Now we can talk about lust. Now that we've talked about responsibility, we can start talking about lust, right? No show of hands, right? Who's read or watched 50 Shades of Grey? I mean, these are the things that'll get us into trouble. You can talk about the good and the evil, right? Good is love, romance, sex, attraction, beauty, but there's just as many evils when you get into the same topic of lust, adultery, divorce, orgies, impurity. What kind of choices are we making? And I really did think this graphic was interesting, right? There's a couple ways to deal with this. One, if women or woman is the issue, what do? Well, we join a boys club. I'm gonna remove myself from that temptation completely. Well, while that sometimes may be a good step, does it really address the issue? Or culture issues are the thing. Oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna isolate myself from culture. Well, that may be a step, but does that really ever address the issue? And how do we go through those things? There are times when we need to remove ourselves from certain situations until we can better address it. But just doing that probably isn't actually addressing the responsibility. So it still comes back to the question, who is responsible for my lust? Or
looks like the answer is me.
You think so?
Yeah, right there on the slide. Yeah, absolutely.
You think so? So we should read a couple of verses.
We probably should.
Okay. So Matthew 5:28. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And just like we talked about murder, right? Very few of us actually get to the act of murder. But hate, that's a lot more common, right? It's the exact same here. Very few people actually get to the point of adultery, I hope. But lust is a completely different issue. So much easier to get to that point. And from Job, this has always been an interesting one. I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a woman. I made a covenant.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
It is.
Mm-hmm. You recognize the issue. I'm taking steps. I recognize that I'm the responsible one. So I'm taking action.
Yeah. I know we're going somewhat quick here, but it's a heavy topic, and then we'll maybe open it up for some discussion. So remember, sin never only impacts just you. And lust is a perfect example of that, which I don't know, which lesson was it recently that we talked about the impact? Was that Chan?
Yeah. Francis Chan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Where sin is never just my issue. It's impacting my relationship with Terry. It's impacting my relationship with my wife, my kids. You know, we can't understand what true relationships would be without sin. But all of this sin has degraded every relationship we have in some way,
Including relationship with Christ.
including our relationship with Christ. Yeah, so, you know, one of the maybe the good or bad things about a sin like lust is that it's usually on the inside. It's really hard for others to see. And that's why it's a good reminder from 1 Samuel, God sees the heart. You're not hiding anything from God. How often have we tried that? We've hidden things all our lives. And somehow think if it doesn't come out into the open, we're okay. But it's not. God sees the heart. And then from both Romans and Ecclesiastes, you know, a quick paraphrase, God will one day judge the secrets of every heart. May not be in this lifetime, but we will be judged for what our hearts are. And that's scary because we've all got things hidden, unfortunately.
I think it's scary if we don't take action.
Yes.
If we don't recognize it, if we try to push off responsibility, and if we don't take action on it.
It's so easy because it's hidden. It's the hidden sin. Okay, we're gonna keep going.
If you want to.
Only if we want to. I know I'm doing a lot of the talking since I guess this was my slide.
This was your slide, so
Yeah.
I'm just trying to wedge in.
So sin in the mind is a fruit of the same moral defect that produces the deeds of sin. And that is one of the reasons why Jesus was so serious about it, right? Again, we're going back. Murder is the easy one to conceptualize. You know, I haven't murdered anybody, but as soon as I've hated, that hate is the same starting point as murder. It's just addressing it at a different point in time. It's addressing it earlier. So how do we, with these sins of the minds, how do we address these? Because if it's rolling around in our heads and we're giving it time, I mean, I think that's one of the, you know, it talks about intent, right? We can't control everything that pops into our heads, but what do you do with it next? Do you dwell on it? Do you mull it? Do you take it to a different level, or do you push it out?
I had a friend that he struggled with swearing a lot. He knew it was a problem, and he was telling me the story about it. And I said, I've never heard you swear in my entire life, and I've spent a lot of time around you. He said, no, it's in my head. He said, I'm working on that. I thought, wow, okay, he's serious about this. Absolutely serious. I'd never heard him swear, but he thinks it in his head, and he always filters and he always stops, but he's trying to just work that out of his head and out of his heart.
Yeah, but how many people would actually do that? If it's not like,
Not one.
right, and that's the thing, is usually we're working on the things that we know other people can see.
Mhm.
And as long as somebody else can't see it, we don't take it nearly as serious. Nearly as serious. And another interesting point here, the second one, hidden sin, which lust most often is, involves the compounding sin of hypocrisy, right? Because usually we wouldn't say that's okay, but yet it's the thing that we keep going over and over in our heads.
Yeah, how many high-profile people or stories have we heard where they're condemning certain things and, you know, condemning all this stuff, and you find out, whoa, what was going on in your life that just came out?
Yeah,
it's hypocrisy.
it is. Yeah, and interesting, it was described as the compounding sin, right? These things start to build on each other, and then you let a couple of these things on top of each other, and then you start not caring what else is going on. I think it multiplies so much differently in your mind and your heart. And lastly here, do you want to know who you really are? Take a hard look at your private life, especially your innermost thoughts. Do you really want to know who you are? It's not always what other people see. It's what's happening on the inside. And that's what God, in 1 Samuel was indicating, when he passed over all of the rest of, what's his name? David's brothers. Those guys. What's David's father's name? It just blanked on me. Jesse. Thank you. Jesse. All of his other kids for David. Yep, because he knew his heart. So what does our heart actually look like? I know that's a scary question.
Absolutely, but it's one we should dwell on, right?
Yeah.
We should take a hard look at our private life and our innermost thoughts, just like that friend of mine. He knew it, he recognized it, he's working on it. I admire him for it.
Yeah.
And how difficult is that?
That's right. Yeah, and one of the first things we talked about in this section is, when was the last time you took true responsibility for your actions? Or when was the last time you adequately addressed something that was happening in your mind? What do you put in the place? Jesus talks about, he'd come in and banish the evil spirits, clean the house. Well, if nothing's put back into the house, what happens? It's a clean house for all the spirits to come in. And maybe there's more room for the evil spirits to come in because you just cleaned it. We've got to be putting stuff into our minds, into our hearts. Okay, I've talked a lot on this stuff. Questions, comments for Terry?
Sorry. This is about transformation, right? This is right back to we take it seriously and we transform our minds and our hearts. It starts from the inside.
Yeah.
Spirit.
Yeah, and Jesus didn't leave these harder things untested. Again, he started with murder. Not a lot of us can relate to that. We can relate more to hate, but when it comes to adultery and lust, I think a lot more of us can relate to that than we can relate to murder. I'm assuming. And how do we need to address these things?
So this rolls right into responsibility, right? If we keep this question in mind, who is responsible for fill in the blank, then that's going to tie into the next couple of lessons that we get.
You ready?
I'm ready if you're ready.
I'm ready.
So,
okay.
Anybody have any questions or comments on that section so far? Kristen?
The work of the Holy Spirit to divide the marrow from the flesh, and how it works on our conscience. It's a study on
managing emotions. Yeah.
Part of the personal responsibility is and then doing the hard work of maybe where our triggers are.
Right.
Because, like cultural things, the mental health, whatever, they work with understanding. But sometimes they or the sin that follows.
Right.
For
Exactly.
example, if I surround people who swear all the time, it's more likely that it's going to come. So when I'm sitting here and watching whatever does create quite an impact.
Right.
So that we talked about
Right. But
with God. Anyway, trust with God. That's the key. How often trust God has faith to bring to Him.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true, right? How many times do you have somebody who calls you, oh, they only need something. They only call me when they need something. Are we doing that for God, right? That's not a relationship, right? Mhm.
Oh, by the way.
Yeah, and if we have a relationship, then we are more prompted by the Spirit and more apt to take the Spirit's prompting in our lives and take action on it.
And all fruit of the
Exactly, yeah. It's our choice. We're responsible.
Mhm.
One of the, I think one of the most helpful things as a Christian is to see each other as brothers and sisters of Christ. My brother talked about like brothers and brothers, so we forgot to say, we grew up south, call each other.
Yeah.
And my girl was commenting about that at Thanksgiving. Why are we brothers? But it actually helps,
Mhm.
we talk about us and, to see each person as sibling, your mother, your father, you know what I mean?
Yep, yep.
So I think that, reforming our minds, and then people who aren't Christians, they are images of God.
Mhm.
They are made in the and so to defile an image bearer of God, it just, I don't know, it helps me to kind of.
Exactly, yeah. It's a very good point. Thank you, Sister Kristen. What she says is true. Absolutely, absolutely.
same way.
Yeah, yeah. Brothers and sisters.
I feel like there's a joke here that's unsaid.
You go.
If you call someone sister long enough, it will become a habit.
Man, your YouTube ratings are going up.
Going way up.
Way up. Way up.
Any other jokes you need to go with?
No, I'm good. That's plenty for now. Let me catch my breath.
And that's the one I decided, that was the one I decided to tell. There were still several others running around. Which leads us into our next section.
It absolutely does. Yes. So the next section, if Jesus was serious, then we will take the sin in our lives seriously. Again, this is about responsibility and what do we do with it? What action are we taking? Kind of based on these verses, if your right eye causes you to sin from Matthew 5, gouge it out and throw it away. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. But the point is, without transforming our hearts, we will either be mutilated stumps rolling into heaven or one-eyed lusters. That's from the chapter, right? And so, but we're no closer to living as Jesus asked us to live. Just because we did these physical things, if we did not transform our hearts, are we taking it serious?
And I think one of the things we have a problem with is sometimes Jesus used some humor or hyperbole to get a point across. Is he actually expecting us to chop off our hands or gouge out our eyes? Or is he making a different point here, right? When we start seeing the humor in some of the things that Jesus said or the hyperbole, we sometimes stop taking him seriously. And we can look at so much of what he did. I mean, why did he need to find a coin in a fish's mouth to make a point? I mean, you read some of these stories and it's like, wait, there's humor here. But when there's humor, a lot of times we miss the point. And then we become mutilated stumps because we've cut off all the parts of our body or one-eyed lusters. And actually, I was reading a book where after a sermon on this, somebody came up and he had one eye. And the minister asked him about it. He says, well, I was lusting with my eye. And he said, well, how are you doing? And his response was, well, now I'm a one-eyed luster. What is changing in our heart? We can chop all these things off that we want, but if our heart doesn't change, we're in the same spot.
Exactly. We've got to take it seriously.
We do.
And a quote I found from Mary Morrell, if there's one thing that all the saints would tell us, it's that God's words must change us. That's the bottom line. We read through all the scriptures, we get all the great quotes that we want, but the bottom line is God's word must change us, right? We can't put responsibility for it on anybody else. I can't blame the pastor because he didn't give me the right lesson. I can't blame the song leader because the songs didn't inspire me. I can't blame the lesson instructors, discussion leaders, because they weren't good enough that day. This must change me, and I take responsibility for it.
Yeah. Again, how do we look back into our lives rather than just what's on the external?
Psalm 119 says, I seek you with all my heart. Do not let me stray from your commands. I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. This is about our heart, right? This is about my responsibility, seeking God, hiding his word in my heart, taking his command seriously, taking the sin in my life seriously, and doing something with it.
Yes, very seriously. And again, what are we putting in there other than, we got to put something in there or else the same things are going to happen. You know, what have we been putting in our hearts?
And this one's kind of a culmination of a few things that we've talked about. Our mouths will overflow with whatever we store in our hearts. So if our mouths overflow with fear, anger, negativity, unbelief, or fill in the blank, then we know we're not storing love for God or scripture in our hearts. We're not having a relationship. If I always have bitterness or contempt or malice or whatever, right? That's a heart issue, not an external issue and not a somebody else's responsibility issue. Do we believe that? Because so many times we think, well, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. The guy cut me off. You know, they took the last box of cookies right in front of me in the store. It's not my fault I got mad. It's somebody else's fault.
Or somebody knows my trigger and they pushed it again.
Exactly.
It's not my fault.
Somebody knows my buttons and likes to jump up and down.
Right?
Teresa's nodding her head.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's so many ways that we can point to anybody else but ourselves and address our own issues.
You're not. You will feel it. The critical part here is to figure out our triggers. Do what we need, repent, take action. And self-hatred and shame. Right now, I mean, we have hope and we have joy, and we have a spirit of self-discipline, not fear, not really critical here is all we are and we have to.
Right. Absolutely. That's a great point, right? So we're talking about two ends of the spectrum, and we're just trying to sensitize people to it, because on one end, it's like, I'm okay. It's, it's fine. I know I got this problem. I'm not going to do anything about it. All the way to the other end, which is I am, self-loathing because I can't fix this one thing that I know is wrong that keeps setting me off, that I've tried everything and now I'm just down on myself because of it. Those are the two endpoints, right? And so grace lives in the middle, and our action and our responsibility lives in the middle. That's the healthy resolution. Good point.
God doesn't give up on us, but we shouldn't give up on ourselves.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, at the two extremes, we never really seem to deal with our hearts, right? The one is I don't care anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is I'm so bad, it doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But God is really requiring us. He doesn't leave us where we are. He really, really wants us for our own good to take some of these changes, to make them in our lives.
That's why Hebrews 12 is encouraging, right? Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. That's encouraging. When you have moments like, there's so many things that hinder me and slow me down and I'm ensnared, then, but we have encouragement. We have relationships with Christ, the Spirit, with people around us. We should take advantage of that.
Interesting way this verse puts this, right? Sin it becomes easily entangled in our lives. This is not something we have to go out and find. It seems to find us. Unfortunately, way too easy at some point. But how do we deal with this, right? We run with perseverance. We fix our eyes on Jesus. You know, if we do that, it'll start helping us when we start getting tripped up. Again, things will come into our minds. It's what do we do with it? We'll come across experiences. What is that next step? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Right.
Satan says that's on it.
Right. But he says, keep trying. Keep
Yeah,
trying.
keep
Keep
trying.
trying your own way, your own will, your own strength. Any comments on any of that? That's about taking sin in our lives seriously and taking responsibility. Good discussion.
Yeah. Improv on the mount. I like this graphic. That's good.
Ready to go on to the next section?
Next section it is.
Next section is in Matthew 5, continuing on. The next few lessons are based on verses 38 through 48. So I figured we would start by reading that.
Okay.
You want to do that or you want me to do that?
You take-
Okay. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you.
You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect.
We're going to talk about friends and enemies.
That's a good one.
This is a good one. We have a lot to talk about in the next 8 minutes.
So yeah, chapter 24. Jesus was serious. Then we will love the people who annoy us every day. Anybody have one of those? 2 of those? 10 of those?
Strangers, some friends, some family. We got some waving on the screen. I can see
Yeah.
them.
Husbands? That was Terry.
So loving your neighbor doesn't also equate to hating another group. Just because you love one group doesn't mean you have the right or responsibility to hate another group. And lip service love is not the real thing. Which, yeah, that was one of my questions. So when we talk about love your neighbor, right? How does he love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you? How is he using love here? What's the meaning of love in this section? Does it mean I should, run up and hug everybody and, tell them how important they are to me? Or what's the love in this section? Anybody want to venture a guess?
I think good luck with that.
Right. Be warm and well fed.
Or you could maybe something.
Right.
Some kind of action.
Okay.
Shows you actually love.
Right. Some kind of action. Not just bless their hearts.
I think that's, those are the type of things where, yeah, bless your heart, or I'll pray for you, or some of these that I think are lip service. It's kind of Christian lip service. It really means nothing and we don't do anything. Is that really what we're called to do? I don't think so.
That we're going to get. the way we treat. Innate.
Right.
Exactly.
And are we learning that? Are we set?
Right.
We-
Mhm. Yeah, it's probably both,
Yeah.
right?
Certainly.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, so somebody labels it and points you out, yeah. That's right. Do you have a list of people here, friends, that's on this list, or?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we need to be reminded of who maybe some of these people were supposed to be loving. Right? The inconsiderate spouse, the self-centered teenager, the absent-minded child, the disrespectful boss, the demanding client, the holier than thou pewmate. Did I spell pew right?
You mate,
Nosy neighbor, the crazy uncle. I mean, we all have these people in our.
Dear Lord.
That's what happens when I get to write this.
That's right.
Right? It goes through all these things that Skye included, right? We only love ourselves or our tribe or our cause or those who agree with our cause or our concept of humanity. We easily fall into that category of who are we going to love and care for and support. And that means everybody else is on the other. And that's why I think that's interesting. He says is, right, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Is that really what the Old Testament was teaching, to hate your enemy? No, but we kind of took, if I'm supposed to love one, then I have to, it's like the opposite, right? You have heard, you've kind of understood, you've kind of made some of these assumptions. And so how often do we do that, where we say, oh, grace is by, or, salvation is by grace. And so, okay, anything that has to work. So all of a sudden we throw way over here is just the opposite. We do this so often with some of our positions.
I mean, to me,
That's right.
I have to like them. I don't.
Right, right.
Whatever it is. Right?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. I wonder what the crowd thinks, but I mean, it definitely doesn't mean you have to agree with them, right? Because then nobody would help anybody. It doesn't mean we have to like them, like hang around them. Like, I've served you. That doesn't mean that, we get to go to the movies together.
And you wanted it. You did that.
Right.
But it's about
Right. Seem to have a specific example in mind from your stories. He's looking up this direction. Yeah. What's that?
Sounds like you.
It does. It absolutely does.
We had.
That was a long time ago.
Anyway.
Mhm. Right.
And eventually, sometimes the feeling comes. The feeling of friendship.
Right.
And continuing to
Right. Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
It's not rocket science,
Rocket science.
but it's tough.
So this leads us to one of these comments. I love mankind. It's people I can't stand. Right? Sums it up from the Peanuts series, right? Charles Schultz, he was brilliant. So Linus has some great wisdom here. But you know who also has great wisdom? Somebody else we know, Albert Einstein. I love humanity, but I hate humans. We feel this way sometimes, right? I want to love and serve humanity, but people drive me crazy. Individuals drive me crazy. And that's something that we struggle with as humans. But I think we recognize that, like we said earlier, Sister Kristen said, we everyone is God's masterpiece. We're all God's workmanship. And so as I'm serving someone, maybe that I might not like them enough to take them to the movies, but at least I see something in them. I know that God created them for a reason, created them with a purpose. And maybe they haven't gotten there yet. They're still being shaped, but I see something in them. And that drives me to continue to serve people that I might not even like.
Sometimes I think it's everyone.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, we really need that reminder.
This is our last slide for this. By the way, the topic was, if Jesus was serious, then we will love the people who annoy us every day. Jesus is calling us to love the everyday enemies closest to us. People that drive us the craziest, right? People who are in your way, on the road, in your house, at the store, in your office, in your hobby. He called us to love the everyday closest. I like that phrase, everyday enemies. Because it's, people you don't even think twice about. It's just somebody you're mad at, they're in your way, somebody on the news, a talking head, now you're frustrated. Calls us to love them. And Romans 5 points that out. Since now we have been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? We were God's enemies, but we've been reconciled. So how reasonable is it for us to keep enemies in our own lives? We are saved by a man who died loving his enemies. It puts enemies in perspective. It puts everyday enemies in perspective. Okay, thanks for your time. Any comments, questions, thoughts, interest, demands? Okay, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Good. Bye, everybody.